Do you really buy what the media is hyping up? Inflation is cooling down, unemployment is low, and the US economy is looking more resilient than ever. On paper, the picture is so flawless it makes people think the American dream is officially back. But if everything is so great, why is America suddenly filled with infrastructure graveyards? Escalators are still running to absolutely no one in major malls, and airport lounges are suffocating in a bone-chilling silence. Cash and people, the two lifeblood keeping a superpower alive, have clearly stopped moving. Stock charts don't feel hunger, and report numbers don't have to pay rent. We're being blinded by a cleverly disguised illusion of prosperity. This video is going to expose the brutal truth behind these ghost stations and answer the burning question, is America actually in deep trouble in 2026? Let's get into it. To understand why malls are turning into ghost towns and why so many airports are getting quieter, we need to take a step back, because this story didn't actually start with retail, nor did it start with aviation. It started with an idea that has shaped modern America for decades: motion. After World War II, America entered an era of unprecedented growth. Millions of families packed up and left crowded city centers for the suburbs. Brand new interstate highways connected states. Cars became the ultimate symbol of freedom. Planes became the symbol of opportunity, and shopping malls popped up like consumer oasis right in the middle of new residential areas. Looking down from above, America was like a giant organism with millions of blood vessels constantly pumping. People moved to work, to shop, to vacation, and to chase a better life. The interesting thing is, the so-called American dream can be summed up by a very simple idea. You can always go further than where you are today. Further geographically, further in income, further up the social ladder. That's why, for decades, Americans didn't just buy houses. They bought bigger houses. They didn't just drive. They drove further. They didn't just take vacations. They took them more often. And they didn't just shop. They shopped like the future would always be wide open. This is a crucial point. Because malls and airports weren't actually the cause of prosperity. They were just the byproducts of a society confidently moving forward. But here's something to think about. During its peak boom, America was building hundreds of new malls every single year, becoming the country with the highest retail space per capita in the world. Meanwhile, domestic flights skyrocketed decade after decade. Everything was designed based on one single assumption, that the foot traffic would keep growing, the cash flow would keep growing, and the demand for travel would keep growing. In other words, an entire economy was built on the belief that the motion would never stop. And this is where things get interesting. If a society is built on motion, what happens when the signs of that motion start to slow down? When the places that used to be the most crowded aren't crowded anymore? When the symbols of consumerism and mobility suddenly go quiet at the exact same time? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you like these kinds of overlooked socioeconomic perspectives, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because in the next part, we're going to look at the exact images making many Americans anxious. Places that were once symbols of growth, now drowning in a silence that's hard to explain. If you want to feel how America is changing in 2026, sometimes you don't need to read 100-page economic reports or market research. Just stand still for a few minutes in places that used to be the most crowded, a shopping mall on a weekend afternoon, an airport right in the middle of peak hours, and just listen. What catches many people off guard isn't the noise, it's the lack of it. A lot of Gen X and millennials still remember what it felt like to spend the whole day at the mall. It wasn't just a place to shop, it was where you met up with friends, caught a movie, grabbed dinner, walked around, and sometimes did absolutely nothing. People went to the mall just to feel like they were part of the social buzz. But today, in so many places, hallways that used to be packed are now so empty that your footsteps echo past rows of shuttered storefronts. Some malls are still open, the lights are on, the AC is running, but it feels like a stage after the audience has long gone. It's a sight that's both familiar and hard to wrap your head around. The same thing is popping up at a lot of airports. Not all of them, but enough to become a noticeable trend. Terminals that used to be jam-packed with passengers now have these long, empty stretches between crowds. Some boarding gates are so quiet that staff can clearly hear conversations from the seats across the aisle. People joke that you used to get to the airport 2 hours early out of fear of missing your flight, but now it feels like the airport is waiting for the passengers instead of the other way around. It sounds funny, but it's exactly that contrast that's making a lot of people uneasy. The key thing here is that these places used to be looked at as the ultimate symbols of growth. Malls thrive when people feel confident spending money. Airports thrive when people feel confident traveling. So when both start getting quieter at the same time, the story probably isn't just about retail or aviation anymore. Some older folks mentioned that they used to fly out to see family a few times a year without thinking twice. Today, those trips require a lot more math. It's not that they don't want to go, it's just that financial priorities have shifted. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Are we looking at a temporary shift in consumer behavior? Or is this a sign of something much bigger happening beneath the surface of the economy? If you've been to a mall or an airport recently, share your thoughts in the comments below. In the next few minutes, we're going to dive into a much more important question. What is actually causing these once crowded places to go quiet? And the answer might not be what you usually hear on the news. At this point, a lot of people might quickly jump to a conclusion. Maybe Americans just don't like going to the mall anymore. They shop online. They stream movies at home. They hang out on social media. Similarly, maybe they just don't want to travel as much as they used to. Sounds reasonable, right? But if you look closer, the picture is a whole lot more complicated. The funniest thing is, consumer surveys year after year show that most Americans still love to travel, still prefer in-person experiences, and still want to spend time with family and friends in the real world. In other words, the demand hasn't vanished. The desire hasn't gone away. What's actually changing is the ability to turn those desires into reality. And that is a massive difference. A family might still want to take their usual summer road trip, but when rent goes up, grocery bills climb, insurance costs spike, and interest rates hit the roof, that vacation becomes the very first thing cut from the budget. It's like a ship sailing through rough seas. It's not that it wants to stop. It's just forced to slow down to survive. This brings us to a major paradox. Empty malls don't necessarily prove that people hate shopping. Quieter airports don't necessarily prove that people hate traveling. In many cases, it just reflects a simpler reality. A lot of people are prioritizing what they have to pay for over what brings them joy. A several $100 plane ticket could mean a month's worth of electricity or a chunk of an insurance bill. A weekend shopping spree might have to take a back seat to a car repair or other unexpected expenses. That's not a shift in taste. That's a shift in priorities. And here's something to think about. This isn't just happening to low-income groups. More and more middle-class households are also opening up about having to second-guess decisions that used to be a no-brainer. Someone joked that booking a flight these days feels like preparing to buy a major appliance. You have to compare prices, hunt for deals, and think twice before hitting that checkout button. It sounds funny, but it reflects a very real psychological shift. When the cost of living rises faster than your sense of financial security, you start putting off experiences that you used to not even think twice about. So, if the issue isn't that people don't want to go, but rather that it's getting harder and harder for them to do so, then the next question gets even more interesting. What happens to the communities, the businesses, and the economy as a whole when more and more people make that exact same decision to cut back? Now, let's move on to a phenomenon that's rarely talked about, but has a much bigger impact. What happens when cash is still floating around in the economy, but it's no longer flowing through the places that used to keep entire communities alive? When you see an empty mall or a quiet airport, the natural reaction is usually to think about the businesses that are struggling. But that's just the first layer of the story. What's more notable is what lies beneath the surface. Because in a modern economy, money doesn't work like a stagnant pond. It works like a river. The real value isn't about how much water is in the river, but how many places that water actually flows through. Imagine a crowded mall back in the 1990s. A family goes shopping for the weekend. They grab lunch at the food court, buy a pair of shoes, catch a movie, pay for parking, and maybe grab a coffee on the way home. In just a few hours, a single chunk of money has passed through a dozen different businesses. It pays the wages of the sales clerk, the janitor, the security guard, the food supplier, and countless back-end services. A dollar doesn't just sit there. It constantly changes hands and creates new economic activity. Here's something to think about. When a mall turns into a ghost mall, it's not just the retail stores that take a hit. Restaurants lose customers. Advertising agencies lose contracts. Transportation services have fewer trips. Even surrounding property values can feel the impact. This effect is like a major link vanishing from an entire chain of activity. And the exact same thing is happening with airports. A passenger not flying means less revenue for the airline. Sure, but it also means fewer guests for hotels, restaurants, car rentals, and a whole host of local businesses. A canceled flight isn't just a plane sitting on the tarmac. It's an entire stream of cash that's no longer circulating. This is exactly where the story gets way more interesting than what we usually hear. Money hasn't vanished from the economy. Plenty of mega corporations are still reporting strong revenues. Plenty of sectors are still growing. But the real question is, where is that money flowing? If it used to be like a rain shower watering the whole garden, today it feels like it's pooling into a few specific areas more than before. And when cash circulates through fewer places, the areas that used to rely on a steady flow of foot traffic start feeling the shift first. This is also why an empty mall or a quiet airport can be a much bigger signal than they appear on the surface. They reflect the velocity of the real-world economy, where everyday people make millions of spending decisions every single day. If you find this analysis making sense, hit like and subscribe to keep following this series. Because right now, we're going to touch on an even more debated topic. What happens when inside the exact same country, two completely different economic experiences start appearing, and not everyone is living in the same America? If you look at the media headlines, you'd think America is doing pretty well. Financial markets are up, certain companies are posting strong profits, major airports in wealthy cities are still packed during peak seasons, high-end resorts are fully booked. But the interesting thing is at the exact same time, in another part of the very same country, a family is debating whether to cancel a trip to see relatives because plane tickets are just too expensive. A worker is putting off vacation for another year to prioritize essential bills. And a mall that used to be the beating heart of a local community is getting emptier by the day. It sounds like two completely different stories, but they're actually happening side by side. This is probably one of the most notable phenomena in America right now. It's not a blanket decline, it's a divide. In other words, it sometimes feels like there are two Americas existing on the exact same map. One America where booking a flight, taking a weekend getaway, or going on a shopping spree is still totally normal. And another America where every single spending decision requires a lot more second guessing than before. What makes this debate so heated is that both of these experiences are completely real. That's why when talking about the economy, one person can insist everything is great, while another feels the financial walls closing in. Neither of them is necessarily wrong. They're just living in different parts of the exact same system. Here's something to think about. This also helps explain a paradox that a lot of people have noticed. Why are some airports still swamped with travelers while others are getting quieter? Why are some luxury shopping districts doing just fine while so many traditional malls struggle to pull in crowds? The answer might lie in the fact that cash hasn't vanished. It's just getting more concentrated. Imagine a massive river. The total amount of water is still there, but more and more of it is rushing down specific branches while other branches are starting to run dry. When that happens, the people standing on opposite banks of the river see two completely different realities. And this is the ultimate takeaway. Economic debates usually revolve around the question, is the economy good or bad? But maybe the more accurate question is, good for whom and hard on whom? If you have your own take on this, share it in the comments. Right now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Because sometimes the most interesting stories begin in the quietest places. This video is intended to analyze, educate, and discuss socioeconomic trends based on publicly available information. The content is not intended to make any definitive predictions about the future, nor is it financial, investment, or political advice. All viewpoints in the video are intended to encourage dialogue and critical thinking. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next videos.